Welcome to Maximize Excellence. My name's Lori Harris, and I'm your host today. And I'm the managing partner of Harris Whitesell Consulting. And today's guest is Gerry Komlofske. Gerry is a technology executive with 35 years experience. He's worked globally as managing partner at Booz-Allen and Hamilton. Gerry's founded and co-founded 5 startup companies. He is the Hedge-fund Operating Partner, Digital Transformation Officer of a Fortune 500 company, angel investor, and senior advisor. His expertise is in leadership, machine learning, artificial intelligence, cloud development, and migration. Gerry's going to be talking today about key leader-follower relationship insights for conscious leaders. Specifically, he's going to cover the history of leadership, sharing a little bit of his own as well. He's going to talk about the lowest common denominator and dependent dualities theory, and he's going to talk about the models of self-awareness. And he's also going to end the conversation today with how technology is changing leadership in our world in business. So welcome, Gerry.
Thank you. Uh, I'll jump right into it. You sort of recapped the organization of this discussion. So my first foray in really thinking about leadership started when I became a partner at Booz-Allen and Hamilton. Booz-Allen and Hamilton at that point started a joint venture with the Aspen Institute on leadership. So we would go to exotic places like Bangkok and Berlin. We'd talk and read about Plato and Kant and discuss Hobbes' Leviathan and how it was controlling society. We'd act out Henry III. We discussed the autocratic leadership style of George Patton and the inclusive leadership style of George Marshall. We talked about Japanese versus American entrepreneur leadership versus enterprise leadership, compassionate leadership. I'm a scientist. To me, that's just confusing. To me, it seemed like there must be a different leader for every situation in any geography in any business. But as a scientist, I started looking for at least one common denominator that was present in every leader. And actually, as I thought about it, there was one. And like all sort of good insights, once you get to it, you think this is actually absolutely a blinding flash of the obvious. But the one thing all leaders have in common are followers. And let me clarify, I'm not talking about supervisors and subordinates. Subordinates are something a supervisor gets as an artifact of an organization chart. Someone somewhere gave them subordinates. Leaders earn followers. So if that's true, then good leaders and followers must have a really special relationship. So when I was thinking this through, I was actually working in Tokyo and living in Tokyo. And I got to know a professor from the Stanford Business School, John Roberts. John was there studying Japanese culture and business practices, and he'd coined the term that Lori mentioned earlier called dependent dualities. Dependent dualities are defined as two things that only exist because of each other. Now, Japanese society had several of those, so let me give you an example from Japanese society. In Japanese company families, which historically have been called kadetsus, which are families of companies, it was almost unheard of for somebody with less time in grade to pass somebody with more time in grade. Basically, it was a very strict seniority process. Now, in the US, a bright young woman could jump to another company, right? But the dependent duality of that seniority program was that the kadetsus had at least a tacit agreement that they wouldn't hire from each other. And so there was basically no secondary job market. So the fact, strict seniority system and no secondary job market only existed because of each other. And if one of them went away, the other one would go away. That's, again, a good example of dependent dualities. Well, remember, I'm thinking about leadership at the time, and I'm thinking about leaders and followers. And I started to realize that leaders and followers were dependent dualities. They only exist because of each other. Now, an interesting corollary to that, is that contrary to popular belief, leaders are not more important than followers. They can't be, right? They couldn't exist without each other. And therefore, that's another indication that there must be a really special relationship between leaders and followers. So let's contrast that again to supervisors and subordinates. the difference between the currency that drives a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about the currency in an organization chart with supervisors and subordinates, it's all about transactions. Right? You do something for me, I'll do something for you. You say nice things about my appraisal, I'll say nice things about your appraisal. You get this done, I'll give you a promotion. Very easy, very straightforward, but it breaks down pretty quickly when one party actually can't follow through, and we've all seen that happen. The currency of leaders and followers is trust. It's a trust that leads to sort of common goals, team cohesiveness, open and honest behaviors, but it's not easy to develop and maintain, right? And it's a little frightening, especially for the leaders, right? As your perspective to share so much influence and so much power with followers is actually kind of daunting. And there's a critical dynamic that actually makes that trust currency happen and that relationship happen. And that trust is financed by self-awareness, right? It does not come naturally to most of us mere mortals. I want to discuss, it is possible, however. I want to discuss now 3 models that enable self-awareness. Now, I have cribbed these from an acquaintance of mine called Jim Dethmer. Jim and a couple of his colleagues wrote a book a few years ago entitled The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. The book has many, many common themes to other leadership books, right? Honesty, responsibility, empathy, listening, appreciation. It's a catalog of the golden rule. But what's different about Jim's book is that it offers several models to establish and test that critical dynamic, self-awareness. So I want to briefly discuss a couple of these models, and I've got a couple of notes here, so I want to make sure I don't mess this up for Jim. And I'm sure that Jim might question my level of understanding of the nuances and particulars of these models, but even applied in sort of my initial way, they've been really, really helpful to me in practicing self-awareness in that critical part of leadership. So model number 1, and I've got a model here, which is basically a horizontal line. Now, it looks a little simple at first, but Jim talks about being above the line and being below the line. Now, if I put a few notes here, if you're above the line, you're open and you're curious and you're listening. And if you're above the line, you're closed and you want to be right, etc. Now, we can all understand that being above the line is better than being below the line. But I have to tell you that a fallacy is that great leaders are above the line all the time. They're not above the line all the time. You can't be, right? Unless maybe you're the Dalai Lama. Evolution has conditioned us to be below the line, right? Over many, many millennia, you were worried about, were you going to eat the saber-toothed tiger for dinner, or was the saber-toothed tiger going to eat you for dinner, right? It's so, again, unless you're the Dalai Lama, you spend a lot of time, maybe most of your time, below the line. Obviously, a conscious effort to be above the line is important, but simply knowing where you are, especially if you're below the line, being self-aware really, really helps the team dynamic. Now, there are times when I looked at team members to lead the dynamic because something's triggered me and I know I'm below the line and I can't contribute the way I want to contribute. And just that understanding actually helps the team dynamic and helps the team be much more efficient and effective without me stirring the pot in a way I don't really need to. Mm-hmm. But I can also modestly say that when I'm north of the line, I can be very creative and build on team dynamics. Now, this mm-hmm. comes with a warning. This model I've oftentimes seen used as a weapon, right? Oh, you're just saying that because you're below the line. Or look, I'm above the line when I say this. Or almost automatically when you say something like that, man, you're below the line. Mm-hmm. So just be really, really careful until you become, at least an experienced practitioner of that model to make sure that you use it for the purposes of good, not the purposes of evil. Model 2 is about conflict resolution. I don't mean conflict identification, really. I don't mean necessarily conflict resolution. Jim calls this model clearing. Now, it's really helpful in understanding whether there's an emotional unease due to facts or due to fiction, which I call stories. and begins a process of resolution. Again, this is called clearing. It's a little regimented at first, so be patient with me as I talk about the 6 parts of this model. So the person that wants to clear approaches the other and asks for a clearing, and if it's the right time to clear. I mean, you haven't been triggered by something, you're not worried about something, etc. We're both in a state that we can talk to each other. And then they state the reason they want to clear. So, for example, somebody might say, "I want to clear because I value my personal relationship with you." Then they state the specifics. You've canceled 3 meetings in a row. Right? Then they express their story or perception of the problem. Right? You seem to be overcommitted to this project, and it doesn't seem to be important to you. And then if they have, they may state how they've contributed to the problem, right? Look, I should have approached you, after you canceled the first meeting, not wait till the third. And then after each of these, the other person states, either wrote or almost wrote, paraphrasing exactly what the other person said, so they can understand it and get it in their mind. And then at the end, that last one is what they specifically want, right? I want to agree on a time commitment, aligned with the importance of this project, right? And that, again, and it sort of ends there, and it just opens things up, and it gets rid of gossip and innuendo, and all this stuff that causes maliciousness in a relationship. And it may seem quite regimented, but after a while, I got to a point where I would just approach somebody and say, "Hey, John, can I talk to you about something that's bothering me? The last couple of meetings we've been in, you seem to want to push past sort of the softer parts of those meetings into just sort of, let's get to work, yada, 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 yada. And you've been a valuable part of this team, and I want you to stay a valuable part of this team, and you're a valuable part of your relationship with me. So I'd really like to talk about why this is." My story, John, is that I think that you don't think this soft stuff in this team is important anymore. You think we can go right by that. Now, maybe I should have stressed it a little bit more, but I think what we should do is get together as a team and really decide what is important and talk a little bit more about the hard and the soft side of this team dynamic, and agree, you may not like this soft stuff very often, and we can deal with that, right? But just, we all need to know, and we all need to be open and honest about it, so it doesn't look like you don't care about what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so that becomes very easy, and it's not so hard. And just the idea that the other person, hopefully on the team, understands the clearing process well and realizes what's going on, it becomes a conversation. It doesn't become a regimented conversation. The third one is my least favorite because I violated it a lot. This is a model that Jim calls villain, victim, hero triangle. Now, we've all seen this, right? Some supervisor probably, or maybe a colleague, finds fault with somebody, the victim, right? And then the victim thinks that's terribly unfair, right? And it creates this toxic relationship. And the hero, which unfortunately Jim pointed out I was several times in several of my companies, the hero generally abhors conflict, and oftentimes will take some share of the blame from the victim, and in the name of empathy, and sympathizes with the victim. I didn't realize how many times I played this role until Jim began to point that out to me, and how my being a hero actually increased the toxic relationship between the other two people in the triangle. And the fact that if I don't do that, then they have to force their way out of that toxic relationship. Mm-hmm. And maybe there are other models that can help with that, but it becomes really, really important that you don't fall into that sort of triangle, because it is. And I realized after I understood what it was, how toxic it can be, and how much damage I was doing instead of the help that I thought I was giving. Mm-hmm. So next, I want to talk about how technology is changing leadership. Now, again, I'm a technologist, right? So most things look like a technology nail to this technology hammer. So there are other historical reasons, and there are many historical reasons, probably the most important one, that why people become leaders, right? One of them is wisdom. It took me a little while to understand what wisdom is, right? I'd often wonder why some of my best mentors and leaders, man, how could they be that smart? How did they realize that was going to happen? Why don't I see that? Wow, she's really masterful at breaking bad news to that client, or really masterful at understanding whether that that sales promotion was going to work. And then I realized that wisdom, it's not that wisdom is some aura of genius. It's not. It's just pattern recognition. Right? But to have that skill, you need to have seen a lot of patterns, and therefore you need a lot of time, which is why many of the people I'm sure many of the people in this that are looking at this presentation think of wisdom as something that exists in older people, right? Because it takes a lot of time for somebody to garner that wisdom. So where does technology come in? Let's step back. Now I'm going to go total geek on you. Let's go to Moore's Law.
Okay.
I seem to have lost it, Lori.
We're here.
Let me just see where I am. Sorry, can you pause for a second? Law. So let's go to Moore's Law. Moore's Law, as many of you know, is every 2 years chips get twice as powerful and are half the cost, right? So that makes computers, which chips make up, very, very, very effective and efficient and very cheap. So what do computers do? Computers do arithmetic, right? And so economists tell us that when supply goes up and cost goes down for a commodity, people do a lot more of it. And that was true with arithmetic. Think about over the last few decades with Moore's Law, we've charted new galaxies, we've mapped the genome, we have self-driving cars. Economists also tell us when things get cheap, they often replace other things where they weren't applicable before. Think about photography. It was a chemical process, but now arithmetic got so cheap, it became a digital process, right? So as a background to machine learning and AI, Moore's Law is very applicable here because what machine learning and AI have done is they make the cost of a decision cheaper. So you can model decisions. You can see how they might play out in the real world through machine learning models. And so the time required to actually see patterns goes down considerably, right? You can artificially create patterns. And so time becomes sort of a non-entity. And so the ability for us commoners to become wise gets to be very, very, very cheap. And so therefore, that particular aspect of leadership, why a lot of people got promoted in the past, is no longer that important. It's still important, but it can be artificial. So it doesn't take time and it's cheap and a lot of people can buy it, if you will. So what that means is self-awareness becomes even more important because some other important aspects would become less important. So in summary, what we've talked about, we talked about the qualities of great leaders, and of all of them, self-importance is the most important. And in fact, technology is making it even more important by making the other quality wisdom much cheaper. Now, you'll probably never be 100% self-aware. But there are at least 3 models we talked about: the line clearing and the victim villain hero relationship. I think that can help you maintain that self-awareness and get you out of a state of being triggered, or at least identify when you're in a state of being triggered, and be a better leader. Or if you're listening to this and you happen to be a follower at the time, make you a better follower. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerry. So my big question to you, right now, people are inundated with stress. We know this. We know right now 76% of our workforce right now is disengaged or unengaged, according to Gallup. And so as leaders, they've got to attend to this. They've got to really look at this in regards to their bottom line. And board of directors are still in the charge of maximizing technology today, as you're saying. So those middle line managers that are dealing with this, what we're calling, what I believe is attending to catastrophe, but we're calling it the Great Resignation. And within that is the disengaged and unengaged employee. We also know from Gallup that right now the 2 top motivators for employees is having a workplace that is healthy and well and having a decent pay. So having set the platform here, and these models that you're talking about, and some of these important things for leaders in organizations and their executive suite and their boards, what are some of what maybe top 3 things that they can do today and within the next few months to really set the pace and set the table for themselves to shift from having these cultures in the workplace that are dysfunctional, moving to maybe more constructive cultures and more effective cultures that are maximizing excellence, not just within their team, in their leadership team, but also throughout the organization?
That's a complicated question, right? I mean,
It
that's
is. It is. There's a
today's
lot going
today's
on.
world. That's the $700 question.
Yeah.
And I think it makes leadership even more important. But what I would, and it's hard to be, much harder to be self-aware when you're looking at postage stamps on Zoom, right? And really trying to understand how, the effect you're having. So it's even more, it's more important to be self-aware, but harder. But what I've done, and I was in the technology, I'm in the technology business, so it's a little bit different. Focus on the positive. In fact, I had a crazy situation where I had a team of a couple of hundred technologists that were working in a large company, and these were guys that didn't actually, were kind of self-motivated and didn't actually like being in big meetings and all that kind of stuff, and actually became more productive when they were working by themselves and didn't have to worry about what somebody else was thinking, that yada yada yada. So what I did, and what my other leader colleagues have done, is focus on the positive. The fact that we're being more productive, the fact that I can award you for things you want to do anyway, and you want to be awarded for. And what are the positive aspects of not having to deal with somebody who's actually articulate instead of somebody like me who's sitting in front of a computer geeking out. I get to spend time with other people geeking out. So you have to create those situations, I think, that accentuate positive behavior. Is that easy to do if you're supervising a a supply line in an automotive company or something like that? Well, that seems a lot harder to me. But I think that the characteristics still hold if you're honest and you're self-aware and you create as little distance as you can between leaders and followers, and you become much more of a team. Then you're in this together. You're not in this as somebody who can go get a job anywhere else because there's so many jobs and nobody would have them. You create longevity, and again, you do that back through trust and back through that relationship. But if you started without it, you're not going to build it in the time of catastrophe like we have now.
So, Gerry, I'm curious, in your tenure of leading large organizations and lots of people, at any time, because of technology, you're a technologist, and at any time, and a scientist, did you use psychometrics to help you as a leader better understand your team? Did you use a lot of these assessments, or did you just take time, or did you do both?
Well, this is a difficult story for me, but I was running a 100-person, 150-person technology company that was acquired by a large company that had 12,000 employees.
Mm-hmm.
And I became the leader of a technology group that had hundreds of people in it. And it was a very, very, very different culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was, in fact, I can embarrassingly say that we had many, many complaints to the big HR department, that we were too demanding, that we didn't care enough, and we had our own way of being teamed up together, and so we all thought we were quite a caring company, and we thought we'd listen to Jim a lot. We had all these characteristics, we thought, but compared to in a big company, HR sort of takes on a life of their own, and maybe it's doing some of that psychographic, psycho analytic stuff that maybe isn't as valuable all the time as just directly confronting the issues and trying to clear and trying to stop the passive aggressive behavior
Mm-hmm.
that happens. But it took me and my leadership colleagues probably 2 years before we actually felt comfortable that we had a team of leaders and followers. Because when we started, man, we were supervisors and subordinates, and it was really uncomfortable for us.
Mm-hmm.
But my colleagues, that worked in the group, didn't understand the difference, and so you had to educate them in the difference. And as we said before, that line model especially is a great tool, but it was used almost entirely as a weapon for the first year.
Interesting. And in the world of what we do with talent management, we find that that is true with the psychometric data as well. And then eventually over time, there is this norming, storming, forming effect, right? That happens that's scientifically normal for us as humans. It takes time for people to adjust and become resilient to the differences that we all have and bring to the table and different levels of energy that we all, you know, bring to the team. So I can absolutely see how this model above the line, below the line can play a significant role. And I'm curious, in your team, were people actually using the term I'm above the line right now, I'm below the line right now at first? Was that happening?
Absolutely. And I'm
Absolutely.
actually the first one that noticed it. I said, man, this is becoming a weapon. This is, and I went to Jim and I said, hey, this is becoming a weapon. And he said, well, what's happening, and you just alluded to this really important thing, is you guys haven't given it enough time,
Mm-hmm.
right? You immediately think that because you have a model, you ought to step in and use it, as opposed to sort of trying to calibrate it. Right now,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. I mean, I had a great quantum mechanics professor who, when I was in college, who had a great definition of time, which was time is the variable that keeps everything from happening at once. Right? That's kind of cool, actually, because before the Big Bang, there was no such thing as time, right? So everything was happening at once, and somehow time was created after the Big Bang, and so it allowed things to start happening sequentially, right? And so time is very important in the universe, but even more important as we deal with each other, right? We have to give, whether it's what you do in terms of people development and leadership development, whether it's what I do in terms of blockchain or AI or whatever. It just takes time to figure out what's going on. And impatience,
Mm-hmm.
well, there have been many articles and leadership books written about how impatience is a good thing. Um, Ambition's a good thing, but impatience, almost by definition, is not a good thing, especially when you're trying something where time is an important variable. And as we said, that changes, right? Time is no longer a variable. In wisdom, you can get that right away. But there are a
Mm-hmm.
lot of other aspects, like the way you have to train your mind to think and be self-aware. That takes time. So my advice to anybody who's trying some of your models or some of Jim's models or whatever is give it some time. Don't think because somebody comes in and gives you a nice 3-day seminar on this that you're going to step right into it and everything's going to be perfect.
So, in wrapping this up, what might be three takeaways that you can share with leaders that are listening for maximizing excellence by using these models that you shared today? What are three takeaways for them?
Well, I would start using them. I mean,
Ah,
I would, and I have to tell you, when I first heard them, they sounded a little sort of goony to me, and yikes. And I was at a seminar with some Goldman Sachs people, and probably one of the smartest people I've ever met was was at Goldman Sachs, and Jim was talking about his line, and this guy was sort of looking at the ceiling and yada yada yada, right? I mean, just he's like 3 times as smart as anybody in the room, and Jim just looked at him and said, "Look, do you want some feedback? Right? You're not interested in what's going on here, are you?" And Jim started probing him, and he just started asking him, and he started, "Why aren't you interested?" And just he went deeper and deeper and deeper until I think in the end the guy was thinking, "Man, I got to give this a go." Um, so that model, again, it's just a model of self-awareness, and it's not one that's going to make you stay above the line. You got to do that yourself,
yeah.
but it is one that helps you understand if you're above or below the line. And that to me was just a critical element of me being a better person, and
Mhm.
certainly a better leader and a better mentor. And then the clearing, again, it's so regimented, it's really hard. But once you get to a point where everyone understands what you're trying to do, you don't really have to follow the regimented steps anymore. You can actually paraphrase them or parastep them, if you will.
Uh-huh.
And then the one I think is the most toxic, and because it hurt me the most, understanding that I was guilty of it, was this villain victim hero, and that does nothing but cause gossip and raises incredible innuendo and toxicity in an organization. So anything that you can do as a leader to stop what I think is critically detrimental in an organization, which is passive aggressive behavior. By definition, that's dishonesty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Passive aggressive behavior, which we've all seen, it just sort of becomes natural over time in large companies as you become very strictly organized, et cetera, and your rewards become very codified, and you just work in these small little differences of good and bad, and that just builds passive aggressive behavior. It's getting out of that, and and with an understanding that maybe things, this kills me as an engineer, but maybe it isn't a zero sum game, right? Maybe we can all sort of gain and gain and gain, and maybe it's a little like nuclear reactions. If you kind of nurture them and let them roll, they get bigger and bigger and bigger.
I love that word nurture. And it's interesting too because with this book, by the way, 15 commitments of conscious leaders, this is the book you're talking about, right?
It is, yeah.
This is a powerful book. He goes in to and the authors here go in to share beyond the model and those 15 leadership insights that you can actually implement over time. We're not perfect humans, like you're saying. Yes, as leaders, we're not perfect, but we can be effective and we can maximize that effectiveness. And sometimes our best is here, sometimes our best is here each day. The great part about this is that I love these three things you're saying. Use these, commit to using them, clear, engage in the process, and then just really focus on that being more self aware and trying to always put that first, prioritizing, and then coming from your strengths and your loves. That in itself, in its entirety, connects you to those other people. So, am I summarizing that a little bit in our way?
Yeah, yeah, no, and be patient, right? I have to tell you honestly, I first read that book about 6 years ago,
Uh huh.
and I have read it and reread it multiple times. I can't even tell you how many times. And I am probably at about commitment number 7,
Uh huh.
because it is there's some almost religious aspects to some of it later on, and there's no references to deities or anything like that, but it really is, at some level, the person you become in this book, the person you become is somebody that sort of things happen with, as opposed to or from or through. And I actually know a couple of people like that, and I think you and I both know a couple of people like that, Lori. But they're few and far between, and have been great practitioners of patience and time and self-awareness.
And the outcomes are exponential.
Yes, they
I'll
are.
just say it. Yeah, that space, that ability to have that level of connection. And by the way, sometimes that connection gets disconnected and you reconnect very quickly, thank God, because you do have that capability and you are very, very self aware and patient and loving and caring. And you eliminate a lot of those distortions and behaviors that keep you stuck and keep you in that mode of being non-productive. What a great conversation. I could go on for hours with you, Gerry. This is wonderful, and I have thoroughly enjoyed hearing you, listening to you share this great model for being a better person, being a better leader. Do you want to have any last words? If anybody wanted to connect with you, what's the best approach for that?
Well, I think you can put my email on the
Okay.
on the presentation. It's Gerry Komlofske at gmail.com. It's probably the best way to get a hold of me at this point.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you again, Gerry, and we appreciate you and look forward to our next conversation with you. Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Maximize Excellence. Visit our events page on our website for details on upcoming podcasts and visit our YouTube channel to listen to past episodes. And remember to ask yourself at the end of each day, did I do my best to maximize excellence today?